Hi everyone, I'm Jess Eddy from Jesse's Cakes and Donuts LLC here in Heartland. I just graduated from WCTC in just this past semester and just started my own business currently on my own under the cottage law, hopefully with aspirations to kind of get out to my own kitchen eventually. And as a student, I was in here last year in place and I had such a good time. I decided to bring my kiddos back and contact Kathleen and say what can I do to help out. So she wanted me to attempt this plaid cake. So I kind of did like the lumberjack plaid type look, and I want to do something different with the fondant. I do a lot of fondant work, and I want to play around with it a little bit to see if I can get to look like bark. So actually before I start doing the cake, I'm going to show you a little technique that you can do with fondant to get this crackle look. Now if you look at it too, do you see how it's getting wet? Fondant and humidity aren't friends. So if you ever have a fondant cake, you want to make sure you have a nice air conditioning building, because as soon as humidity hits it, it starts getting wet like paste. Okay, so you can kind of see that's kind of happening as with the cake, but I should still be able to show you the technique. So what I have here is marshmallow fondant. You can go to the Sugar Geek Show website. That's a really good website I use for a lot of different recipes or just different ideas. And this is just a marshmallow fondant I made at home. What you want to do is just roll it out about 1/8 inch thick. And what is kind of weird with fondant, when you hit heat to it, it'll kind of have more of like a hardness to it. So a lot of times when I do cake boards, I'll even throw them in the oven for a little bit so that it's nice and firm. So when I put my cake on it, it doesn't mess with the board. You don't have to worry about touching it or anything, denting it up. And a lot of times when I do different techniques, I'll torch it so it gets a nice little hard layer on it. So I'm just going to kind of torch the top a little bit. You see how it kind of adds the kind of like a wood grain? Okay. Another technique you could do if you want to take it a little step further, it's almost like a creme brulee. You can add some sugar on top, and that's granulated sugar, not powdered sugar. And you'll see what kind of happens. It'll kind of do like a creme brulee type thing. You see that? So that gives you your kind of like wood burn. So you could even do something like that, even if you just want to leave it like that. But if you want to take it a step further, another thing that you can do, just to add on to it a little bit, to get the white birch type look, I just took a little bit of white gel paint. Make sure it's edible, not real paint, but like the FDA approved. And you just kind of brush it on, and it'll kind of add this kind of, you see how it's, I don't know if you can see, it's kind of picking up on where I caramelized it. It adds a nice little technique onto it. And then to add a little color, if you don't have a liquid coloring gel, what you can also use is the thicker gels. Wilton sells them a lot. What you want to do is add a little vodka or lemon juice. I use Everclear because it's the highest proof, and it'll kind of absorb into it a little bit, and it'll make it, you can even do watercolor like this. So I'll kind of just add the vodka with a little bit of the gel. Actually, we're going to add more vodka. You can never have too much vodka, right? And I'm just going to put little touches of it just to add a little bit of color. So what you would want to do, you would do a whole piece like that, and I don't know if you can see where the sugar was, it kind of picked up some texture. A lot of times, sometimes I'll even just take a brush and add more texture. And then you want to let this dry. As soon as this dries, we'll have like a hard top, and then you can kind of break it up. You can kind of see. You roll it up, crack it. You see how it's cracking? Because we added that top layer of the heat. So that's how you get the crackled look. So, and that's really easy to do on the side of a cake. Sometimes you can do it on a cake board if you want to do it just on a cake board for brownlee cake. So that's just an easy technique. But again, like I said, if you're working with fondant, fondant is great because it can sit out. As soon as your cake is covered, it's protected. So whether you have a crumb coat of buttercream or you have fondant covering it, as soon as it's covered, that cake is going to stay fresh and be protected. But the problem with fondant is, like you saw today, if there is not any kind of air conditioning that's humid, it does literally start melting. So that's something that if you are going to deliver a cake or take a cake somewhere, you want to make sure it's somewhere where you know they're going to have air conditioning. So, okay, so what I did here to make the cake, thank you. I made 2 10-inch red velvet cakes, 1 8-inch chocolate cake, and 1 10-inch red cake. So what I did is I took a white cake and I just added red food coloring to it. Another thing, when you add red food coloring, just taste it as you go, because if you add too much red food coloring, you can get a very bitter taste. So a lot of times when you do red, it's very important to add a dark color in the process versus the end, because it's harder to get there than that. And actually, I went through a little bit of trial and error to get it to where I liked it when it was red enough and still tasted good. So what I did is I took a 8-inch cutter, a 6-inch cutter, a 4-inch cutter, and 2-inch cutter. So every one, and I just did a template with a knife round and cut circles. And then I had it all out. And then what I did is I took red velvet, chocolate, red velvet, chocolate, red velvet. Same thing here. Under here is the opposite. It's red, chocolate, red, chocolate. And then you just kind of go every other. And that's how you get that checkerboard. There are things out there that you can buy where you can just pour it in, but if you want more of an accurate design, then you're going to want to do it this way. So, and I kind of already started some of this. And another thing is too, when you're cutting your cakes, sometimes you'll notice, you see how this one, so I have it a little bit more the same height. If you don't have it the same height, this is what happens. But if you put a nice layer of ganache or buttercream, that will fill this up. So just don't have any fear if you see that happening, don't freak out. I'm a big fan of Bob Ross. There's no such thing as mistakes, just happy little accidents, and I say that all the time. Sometimes things aren't exactly how I want it to go, and then things happen, I'm like, I like that better. So, and I have a couple chefs here in class with me, and they know I'm pretty known for that, so. And usually what you would do for here, since it's kind of like, it kind of stuck because of the humidity. Another thing here, and I don't have it, but if you have floss or string, just pull it underneath and it will detach it really easily. And actually I don't have that here, but I'm just gonna do a rough just so you guys can see what it would be. But I'm gonna put ganache on here. And I don't know, with ganache, there's tons of different recipes out there, but what you want your ganache, if you're going to be layering it, is to make it like a peanut butter consistency. There's different types that you can have. Some people just do chocolate chips and cream. I like to put a little bit of sugar and corn syrup in it just to give it a little bit so it's semi-sweet, not too bitter, in my opinion. So what I did is I took chocolate chips and butter and I left it in a bowl. And then I brought heavy cream, corn syrup, and sugar, just enough to where it comes to a boil. And then you pour it over your chocolate chips and your butter. Don't touch it. Let it sit for at least 2 minutes. Once it sits, then you can stir it. You just want to keep stirring until you get it to the right, until it starts coming together. And then the best time is to do it the day before. If you do it the day before, you can let it sit, and then by the next day, it will be like this. And this will hold up for a while at room temp. So that's another reason why I use it. I want to attempt to try to get these cakes off.
Rather not.
So this is my other guy, my husband. He helps out a lot. Yes. Can try. I'll try after I get this done. Yeah. So if you see, it's kind of filling in any kind of gaps that I had.
Check and see different places.
Let's go for it. It's this right. We're going to attempt to get this off. We're going to have positive thoughts, right? Positive thoughts. So, and you are going to get messy. Anytime you do a chocolate, you're going to get messy. So and don't wear white. That's a lot of times why I don't have a white coat. It's because I used to come home from school oftenly, and this guy would be like, "Did you touch chocolate again?" Because it would be everywhere. So, and don't be afraid to use your hands. Make sure it's level now. It's a lot easier as you're building than after. And a lot of times with cake, sometimes you have it, especially when you're covering fondant, you ever see it, if you ever get a bulge, you have to burp it. So you kind of got to push out the air a little bit. Okay, so burp your cake. Make sure you get that air out. Especially if you add any kind of simple syrup. If you're going to add simple syrup, which is fine, you could add, which is just equal parts sugar and water. You let that melt the sugar and then you just let it sit. And you can actually put that on your cakes so that it also will keep that moisture. So if you have to make it maybe a few days in advance and you have a lot of cakes going on, put the simple syrup on it and then make sure that you are burping because that liquid might build up if you don't. I did not do that with these because I just made the cakes. So if you make it fresh, you don't need to do it. Also, because there's all these different layers going on, it already was very sensitive to cut it. Another tip too is when you cut cake, make sure it's really cold. Because if your cake is not cold and you try cutting it, that's where you're going to get all the crumbs. And also if you're sculpting cakes, make sure it's very cold, okay? So now we're going to go with the next layer. See if we'll get as lucky. Oh, actually we have to put that on first. See, I like to jump ahead. I get really excited about it, and then I sometimes lose it. Would you mind bringing that up, please? So you see, this was the one I left a little bit more gappy because I wanted you guys to kind of see what could happen. But you see how it's kind of filling it in? Just make sure you have an even stroke. If I had that one and it was clean, I would probably be using that. But since it's not, we're just going to make this work. That's a fun thing with cake. You can do so many different techniques. Don't be afraid to play with it. I just started decorating cakes a year ago. Actually, I went to school to be, I really wanted a confectionery store. I wanted to do chocolates. As soon as I got into chocolate class and realized how temperamental it was, and like, I don't think that's my thing. And now I've been doing cakes for over a year now, and actually I just did cupcakes for the Pfizer forum over for the Bucks. And just within a few months of being out of school, I'm already doing bigger things. So just play around with your cakes. It's the best way to get better. Piping, practice, practice, practice. Just like any sport, anything you do, the more you practice, the better you get at it. And this technique I just developed last night. I just played around with it to see what I could create, to try to give you guys a little something different than maybe what you've seen. See, I have a lot of kids, and they all play sports. See, well, maybe you'll like this cake. My kids all play sports. They're very active, so it's not very uncommon for me to set along some desserts to all their teammates. See, you don't need frosting. That's not cake. You can eat it without frosting. This one's being a little bit more temperamental. Now, do you see the longer it's sitting out here, the more it's staying out, the harder it's getting because the temperature of the cake is going down, or it's getting warmer. So if I were doing this at home, I would have had it in the refrigerator covered because if I put this in here, what's going to happen to the cake? It's going to start getting stale because we don't want air to it. So I would probably put a parchment on it so it doesn't stick and put saran wrap or cling wrap on it. Make sure this was in the fridge so when I'm ready for it, it's nice and you can see it's starting to fall apart a little bit, and that's because it's not as cold anymore and it was sitting kind of in the back. Let's see if we get lucky. See how it's starting to fall apart a little bit? So what I did is I got cardstock and I measured out 8-inch, 6-inch, 4-inch, and 2-inch circles. The chocolate cake was an 8-inch round cake pan, so then I only had to keep a 6, 4, and 2. This was a 10-inch round cake pan, and then I used the template from things. And what I did is, like, let's say I had it on here and I had my knife. And you do this, now make sure your knife's straight up and down. If it's like this, it's going to show. It's good. And I just kind of went around it, and then took all the pieces out until I needed to put it together. So again, now what do we got to do here? burp the cake, right? And a lot of times, I don't know if you guys watch Ace of Cakes or any of those shows, the cakes aren't really pretty underneath. It's a lot of kind of like a cake ball. A cake ball is just crumb cake and frosting that we kind of mold. Same thing your Rice Krispie treats. So don't be afraid to kind of mold it and touch your cake because you'd rather do it now even if you have to take a leveler. This is the process time to do it because once your cake's done and you look at it, especially if you tear it up and you're like, oh, it's leaning a little bit, like the Leaning Tower, right? So we don't want that. So it's okay to kind of get your hands in here and do this right now. Like I said, you're not going to be clean if you're doing like ganache. You can see my hands are filthy. My fondant, I like to go to Michael's a lot because I get coupons daily. And I ever get that 40% off, I'm like, going to Michael's, pick up some fondant. Wilton is the best. I made my own today because I wanted to experiment with it a little bit. Wilton is the best because it can hold in the refrigerator better. A lot of other ones, like the Marshmallow Homemade, even when you make those, add some Wilton fondant to it because Wilton is the best that there's out there. Any other ones that I've tried, or even if you look through different cake stores, they'll all say Wilton is the best. So I go to Michael's, sometimes I even go to Walmart. Walmart has really good sales on cake stuff sometimes. So I'll get Wilton things, I'll get my gels from there sometimes. Or Cook's Candy and Specialty Store.
I've been there. I get my Jimmy's there.
Yep. So that's another one. Yeah, I believe it's off of Greenfield. Yep. So that's another good place that you can go to. But that's a little further away from me because I live in Heartland. So I often will go to Walmart or Michael's. I'm not going to go through every little piece of it because I don't want to waste time. I want to cut this up. So obviously this last layer goes on.
After you get it all together, does it have to sit a while so when you get it?
Taking this off. One second. Yeah, so after you get it layered and you do your crumb coat, does everyone know what a crumb coat or dirty ice? Okay, so when I get this on, do you see how the sides are all exposed? Once I layer my cake, I want to add a crumb coat. So I'm going to add frosting just all over the sides because it's going to form crumbs. And that way if I get like a dirty ice or crumb coat, however you want to call it, I'll have my layered cake, I'll have a thin layer to fill any gaps I have. It takes care of any crumbs. Put it in the refrigerator. It's fine because it's no longer exposed to oxygen. And then what you want to do is when it's cold and it had time to set, you add that last layer of buttercream or design because now you're not going to get the crumbs. Another tip too of what I would be careful, if you notice, I kind of had two different containers. The reason for this is because I knew I was going to be dipping this crummy stuff right back in here to keep dipping, right? I don't want that in my fresh ganache because that would be for like the outer layer or so on. So just kind of be aware of that when you do it.
I never knew that. I was wondering why I had cut the sides.
The sides?
Yeah, I always had a little crumb.
And you cannot, and remember how I said when you cut it, what happens? It gets crummy. You don't ever want to try to cover your cake either when it's like warm.
I love
because
doing
all the crumbs, all the crumbs are going to get right into your cake. So, yeah. So these are just a lot of different things. And you know what? A lot of this stuff gets learned by trial and error. A lot of this stuff I had to kind of make the mistake. That's why I tell my kids all the time, make mistakes is the best way to learn. So, and I play around with stuff all the time.
They're lucky they have it.
My husband eats a lot too. Okay, so as you can see, right now is the time I'm going to take the time and try to make it as level as I can. Now this I don't have to worry as much because it's a tree trunk. I want it to be a little off, so I don't have to worry as much, right? Now if I was doing a wedding cake, I probably wouldn't do this design. If I did, I would make sure I have it really good. I'd be a little bit more strict on my edges. If you're doing wedding type cake, that's when you really want to make sure it's level. Take out a leveler if you have to. Because like I said, as soon as you put that layer on and you start stacking, it's at that point it's already happened. You can try to burp it a little bit, but so this is the time you'd want to do it. Okay, so I'm just going to